Hello, and welcome to Chapter 18 in Healthcare Supervision. We are talking about the management of change. Resistance is where you find it. This is a super short chapter, and I'm going to keep this lecture super short as well. So starting on 312, first paragraph under the nature of change. We have heard it said over and over again that the only constant in this world is change, and often we do feel, with good reason, that there are few permanent features in our everyday world. It is also no secret that much seemingly accelerated change is a product of recent times, so much so that change has become the dominant force in our lives. And so if you continue to read through there, it talks about considering technology of daily living. So compare the era of the Roman Empire with the period of colonial America, and then consider how true little change occurred in about 2,000 years. But then over on page 313, it's talking about how the advent of the railroad locomotive in the late 1820s kind of changed the whole game. And from about 1830 to the mid-1940s, that's about 115 years, total knowledge increased about 5 times over. And it might seem surprising to learn that knowledge could multiply some 5 times within the relatively brief span of 115 years, after remaining practically static for thousands and thousands of years. That increase, however, pales by comparison with the rate of knowledge growth experienced since the mid-1940s. So with the splitting of the atom, made giant strides in electronics, followed by advances in every field of endeavor, and opening up of numerous new fields, technology has literally exploded. So in few areas of life has change wrought by technologic advancement been more evident than in medicine. In fact, most of what we must work with was developed within lifetimes of generations now employed in healthcare. Some have found that most of the technologies they employed near the end of their careers did not exist when they first entered their chosen fields. Careers today are not especially stable. We find ourselves faced with constant change as a way of life. We must continually upgrade our knowledge and skills simply to stay even with the advances made in our own fields. So is there any security? We tend to associate security with stability. However, we are undeniably among the first generations on Earth to experience massive change within our own lifetimes. In the past, there was security in being unchanging and inflexible, in adopting a set of values, a pattern of living, and an approach to our work and pursuing these for life. However, this behavior is no longer appropriate. The times in which we live suggest that our security now lies in our ability to be flexible and adaptable. So, there's major changes affecting supervisors, and you can continue to read through that in the inflexibility or resistance, and then moving on over to 314 with the changing with an evolving role, and that's where we're going to get into these major changes affecting supervisors. So as an industry, healthcare has for some time been accustomed to constant technologic change, and certainly business overall has seen continuing social and legislative change as well. In addition to these previously visible sources of change, the past few decades have brought a number of additional changes, some approaching traumatic, driven by economic concerns related to alarming growth of healthcare costs. The healthcare industry has been put in a position of attempting to provide all citizens with the best available care from an ever-expanding base of medical technology, while holding down the consumption of financial resources in doing so. So basically, in other words, they're saying industry is expected to improve access to care and either maintain or even improve quality, but keep those costs down now. Don't you be spending all that money to do all that extra stuff. So what are the 3 areas that affect supervisors the most? Well, number 1 is the increased scope of responsibility. So because there are changes in care delivery, changes in organizational structure, and cost reduction measures, most supervisors can expect to be required to do more than they previously had to do. So there's been a flattening of the organization, whether that's eliminating, middle managers and not having those extra layers of management. Sometimes those individual supervisors find that he or she now make decisions that were previously made by a higher level in the structure, so that responsibility is increasing. Second, increasing span of control. Usually related to increased scope of responsibility is an increased span of control. As the total numbers of supervisors and managers decrease, as in many cases departments or units are combined, the supervisors who remain discover they now oversee more functions and activities, larger physical areas, and greater numbers of employees. And then third, having a shared management or divided reporting relationships. And as more and more formerly independent healthcare providers come together via merger, acquisition, or affiliation into health systems and other entities, it is becoming more common to encounter supervisors who are shared among separate facilities. The advantages of such restructuring include savings based on economics of scale. Consider, for example, two hospitals in the same community, now merged into one organization, sharing a pharmacy manager or a billing supervisor instead of each having to employ their own. Working in the shared mode places a whole new set of requirements on the supervisor, not the least of which is the necessity to constantly balance the needs of one site with those of the other. Or, on the other end of the shared management phenomenon, the individual supervisor may experience no significant change in job structure, but may nevertheless be forced to operate much more independently than before because the manager to whom the supervisor reports is now shared between facilities. All right, so flipping over to page 316, we're going to talk about why there may be resistance. So people resist change primarily because it disturbs their equilibrium and threatens their sense of security. For the most part, we all seek equilibrium with our surroundings, that balance of values, activities, and environment with which we can be most comfortable. To some people, that equilibrium is a comfortable, dependable rut. To others, equilibrium is a pattern of change, but it is their change ordered in their way. With equilibrium, we find a measure of security, and we shift and move against daily forces in small ways to continually reestablish and maintain equilibrium just as surely as water continually seeks its own level. In work organizations, most instances of resistance can be traced to one or more of the following general causes, and we've got 5 listed here. So the first is organizational changes, in which departments are altered or interdepartmental relationships or management reporting relationships are changed. Second, management changes, in which new management assumes control of an organization or department. 3, new methods and procedures indicating that people are expected to do new and different work or accomplish old tasks in new ways. 4, job restructuring, requiring that tasks be added to or deleted from people's jobs. And last, new equipment representing new technology or technological departures from equipment previously used. Brief consideration of these 5 general causes can give one an appreciation of the effects that the healthcare industry's emphasis on merger, acquisition, affiliation, and such is having on employees and their tendency to resist change. Look at the general causes of employee resistance, and then look at what happens when, for example, 2 organizations merge. Significant organizational changes are a virtual given. Extensive management changes are likely to occur, and job restructuring and new methods and procedures are expected to follow. And in addition, the reality of a merger or other organizational combination can give rise to the fear of job loss on the part of many employees. This all adds up to a maximum threat to employee equilibrium. All right, so how do we introduce our employees to change? So we're going to move over to 317 under the supervisor's approach. As a supervisor interested in implementing a particular change, you have 3 avenues along which to approach your employees. You can, number 1, tell them what to do. Number 2, convince them to do it. Or number 3, involve them in the planning for the change. So we're going to talk about each one of these 3. So in telling employees what to do, specific orders, commands, if you will, have been described as one of the marks of the autocratic or authoritarian leader. The boss is the boss, a giver of orders who either makes a decision and orders its implementation or relays without expansion or clarification the orders that come down from above. The authoritarian approach is sometimes necessary. Sometimes it is the only option available under the circumstances. However, the tell them approach is the approach most likely to generate resistance and should be used in only those rare instances when it is the only means available, as, for example, in emergency situations when instant, unquestioning response is necessary. So then second, convincing the employees. In most instances, including those in which the change in question is a hard edict from the upper reaches of the organization, you have room for explanation and persuasion. At the very least, you should endeavor to make each employee aware of the reasons for the change and the necessity for its implementation. It may be that you have to champion the cause of something clearly distasteful to you as well as some employees, because it may be good for the institution overall, or good for the patients, or even perhaps because it's mandated by new government regulations. Your employees may not like what they are called on to do, but they are more likely to respond as you need them to if you know and understand the why of the change. Your employees deserve information, and information serves you well because it often removes the shadow of the unknown from your employees. Few, if any, changes cannot be approached by this selling means, and the authoritarian tell them approach should be reserved for those occasions when someone clearly cannot be sold or there's no time to do so. And then back to our third, involving the employees. Whenever possible, and especially as it affects the way they perform their assigned task, involve your employees in shaping the details of the change. It has been proven that employees are far more likely to understand and comply when they have a role in determining the form and substance of the change. For instance, if you're considering new equipment and have sufficient lead time, get the input of the people who will have to work with the equipment once it's in place. If the institution is to be expanded or remodeled and your department will change its physical space and arrangement, get your employees' opinions on where things should be located and how work should flow. Through involvement, change can become a positive force. All right, and the last thing we're going to cover in this section, and you will list these on the test, are the guidelines for effective management of change. So number 1, plan thoroughly. Fully evaluate the potential change, examining all the implications in regard to its potential impact on your department and the total organization. Number 2, communicate fully. Completely communicate the change, starting early, and be sure that your employees are not taken by surprise. Make it two-way communication. Pave the way for your employees' involvement by soliciting their comments or suggestions. Number 3, convince employees. As necessary, take steps to convince your employees of the value and benefits of the proposed change. When possible, appeal to the employees' self-interest. Let employees know how they stand to benefit from the change and how it may perhaps make their work easier. Number 4, involve employees when possible. Recognize that it is not possible to involve employees in all matters. Again, for instance, you cannot do much about a mandate from above or a new external regulation. Involvement is nevertheless possible on many occasions. Be especially aware of the value of your employees as a source of job knowledge, and tap this source not only for the acceptance of change, but for the development of genuine improvements as well. And last, monitor implementation. As with the implementation of any decision, monitor the implementation of any change, especially one involving employee task performance, until the new way is established as part of the accepted work pattern. A new work method, dependent for its success on willing adoption by individual employees, can be introduced in a burst of enthusiasm only to die of its own weight as the novelty wears off and old habits return. New habits are not easily formed, and your employees need the help you can furnish through conscientious follow-up. So those 5 guidelines you're going to list: plan thoroughly, communicate fully, convince employees, involve employees when possible, and monitor implementation. Now for the last section. Resistance to change will never be completely eliminated. People possess differing degrees of flexibility and exhibit varying degrees of acceptance of ideas that are not purely their own. However, involvement helps, and you will eventually discover, if you have not already done so, that most employees are willing to cooperate and genuinely want to contribute. Beyond involvement, however, communication is the key. Full knowledge and understanding of what is happening and why are the strongest forces the supervisor can bear on problems of resistance to change. Ultimately, you will discover that it is not change that people resist so much as they resist being changed. So again, read this entire chapter. It is a relatively short chapter. It will be combined with chapter 19. So happy reading, happy studying, and get those review questions answered.